Hello, my name's James Lister and I'm a classical guitar maker based in Sheffield in the UK. Today I'm going to show you a way of making a V-joint. There are a number of different types of V-joint and different approaches to making them. This is just one. The neck and head will be made from Spanish cedar, Cedrela odorata, and I'll be using mostly basic hand tools, but I will be using a bandsaw for the initial cuts. In preparation, I've cut out and thickness the head section, in this case to 18mm, which will give a final thickness of 21mm when the head plate is added. The neck section has had the top surface planed flat, but I've kept the thickness at 25mm, which is about the minimum you'll need for a V-joint. The actual thickness you need depends on the size of the V and also the angle of the headstock. The size of the V I use is 30mm across the base and 40mm long. With a 25mm thickness neck blank, that allows me to have a head angle of about 11 degrees. I've sawn this end of the head section more or less square, and I'll now be planing that up so that it's perfectly flat and square. I'm going to use a small low angle block plane. This is a Lie-Nielsen. This one's been modified slightly because as it comes, the side of the plane is not actually square with the base, so you can't use it on a shooting board. So I've made this surface square. Just before I start planing that, I'm just going to plane a little bevel onto that edge so that it doesn't chip away. I'll set that a little finer. And hopefully you can see you've got a nice clean flat surface. Just going to check that with the square. That's fine. I've now marked a centre line in pencil on the head section, and I'm going to be using a template to mark the V. This template will be used both on the head and the neck sections. I'm going to use a scalpel to mark the V on the head section. Just going to push the template up against a flat block and carefully align the centre line on the template with the centre line on the head. Hold that down and just gently mark either side of the V. It's a fairly faint mark, but it is visible. So I'm now going to cut out the V on the head with a bandsaw using a fairly fine blade and cutting obviously just inside the line. The closer you go to the line, the less chiselling you'll have to do, but of course you have to be very careful not to go over the line. There we have the rough cut V. So we're now going to start using the chisel to work on the inside edges of the V to make them perfectly flat, and so we get a perfect fit to the template. For a lot of the fitting process I use a backlight, and hopefully you can see there, get the angle right. Obviously this is just for sawn finish, so we haven't got a good fit there at all. So we'll be working on these surfaces until that template's an exact fit into a V. Important to note at this stage that your chisel really must be sharp, and also the back surface of the chisel needs to be very flat. I'm going to be using a guide block for the chiselling. This block of wood has been planed so that these two surfaces are accurately flat and square to each other, and we're going to position that here and use it as a guide for the chisel. So I've now clamped the guide block firmly to the head, and I've aligned it accurately with the scalpel line. I'm just going to rest the back of the chisel against the guide block and very gently, with a slicing motion, cut through. If you've cut further from the line with a bandsaw, you may have to do this in 2 or 3 stages. And as you can see, I've gone fairly close to the line with the bandsaw, so there's not very much wood to remove. You won't be able to get right into the V, but work as close as you can in. That's about as far as I can go there. So I'm now going to turn the head round and realign the block to the other edge. So I've aligned the block to the other edge. I'm just going to do the same thing with the chisel. Slicing motion, making sure I keep the chisel flat against the alignment block. Working as far into the corner as you can, being careful not to go too far. So we've now got 2 clean square edges, but as you can see there's still some material at the tip of the V that needs to be removed. We're going to use the chisel for that, but we won't be using the alignment block. So I've now mounted the head in the vise, and I'm going to use the chisel to try and remove the material at the tip of the V. I'm going to use the flat surface we've created as a guide for the chisel, and then the slicing motion cut across the remaining material on the tip of the V. You won't be able to remove it completely. Just cut into that, turn the head over, and then just repeat the process from the other side. And you'll need to keep repeating this, swapping it round, coming in from the other side, and gradually cut right into the tip of the V. What you'll find is when you're pretty well cut through, it's still difficult to get that material out. So at this point, I'll take a scalpel and just start scraping it out. The important thing is to make sure the back of the chisel is always firmly flat against this surface. And there, hopefully, can see that most of the waste is gone. At this stage we need to check it against the template. So we're now using the backlight to check the fit of the template against the V in the head, and hopefully you can see there's just some small gaps where the light's coming through, and there's a very small gap right at the tip, and then towards the top end there's some slight gaps. So I'm just going to do a little bit more work, fine work with the chisel to try and improve that. So I've done a bit more work with the chisel and it's pretty close now. Just to finish it off, I'm going to switch to using a sanding stick. This is just a hardwood stick with some 180 grit abrasive paper, double-sided tape to the stick. This of course is planed very flat, and it's slightly narrower than the width of the head. That reduces the risk of rounding the surface. It's also shaped down to a fairly fine point so it can get right into the V, and being careful to keep the pressure on inside the V with your finger, you can just gently sand. You shouldn't be applying too much pressure, it shouldn't be too much work needed, just to get that fit absolutely perfect, making sure you work right up to the tip and being careful not to round off any of the corners. Switch to the other side. Depending how close you've got with the chisel, this might take 5 minutes, it might take an hour. So I'm just checking the fit of the template again with the backlight. And that's a pretty good fit now. Can't see any light coming through there, I don't think. And you want to check it in these 3 different positions: up against one surface, in the centre, and up against the other surface. Just get that in there. That's against the back surface. There's still possibly a tiny bit of light coming through there. I'm just going to do a little bit more work on it with a sanding stick. So I've done a bit more work with a sanding stick. You might find you need to just take the scalpel again and just gently scrape away to get right into the corner, keeping the surface of the edge of the blade flat against the flat surface as I scrape that. And now I'll put the template in again. That's good, there's no light coming through there. So that's the head part of the V complete. We've got 2 perfectly flat square surfaces here to form the shoulders of the V, and the 2 sides of the V going right into the corner, a perfect fit with the template. So we'll now move on to the neck part. So as I said earlier, the top surface of the neck has been planed perfectly flat and the sides have been planed square, but I've left the back surface rough sawn to keep the maximum thickness. I've marked a centre line all the way along the neck and marked a square line across big enough for the V. On the side of the neck I've marked the angle of the head on both sides. And the first thing I'm going to do is plane down to that line. So I'm using a small block plane again, and I'm going to plane across the grain. So a bit coarser. Trying to match the angle to the line I've marked on the side. quite close now to set the plane a bit finer. Checking line on both sides. That's it. I'm just going to remark a line across here. This time I'm going to mark it with a pencil. Just easier to see than cutting this one. And then finally, before I cut this out on the bandsaw, I'm going to use this new planed surface as a reference for marking a line square along the two edges of the neck blank. Same on the other side. And that's marked up, ready for cutting out on the bandsaw. So when it comes to cutting the neck part of the V on the bandsaw, if we just cut it with the neck flat on the bandsaw table, we're not going to have the right angle on the two edges of the V, nor are we going to have a right angle on the side when we cut the shoulder section. So I use this block which is angled to the angle of the head that I want, and I'm going to cut the V with the neck resting on that block. So I'm just going to cut the two sides of the V first. As with the head part of the V, I've cut as close to the line as I dare to minimise the amount of chiselling required, but of course again being very careful not to go over the line. Now for the cut on the shoulders, I need to mark these on the back of the head, and I'll be using the block the other way around to cut at the correct angle. So I've marked where I need to make the cuts on the back of the neck. Position the neck on the angled block again to get the right angle and cut through. That's one side done, and I'm just going to have to move the camera to get at the other side. So that's both shoulders cut now. I haven't got them very level actually, but we'll be working on that with the chisel. So now I've got the rough cut done of the neck part of the V. As we can see, we've got quite a bit of adjustment to do to get a good fit there. And all that's going to be done with a chisel. At this stage, although in theory it should all be perfectly symmetrical, I've marked one side of the head as top, So I know when I'm checking it against the neck, I'm always checking it the same way around. So at the moment we've got quite a big gap at the shoulders, so the first thing I'm going to do is start taking some material off the V. So I'm using my square guide block again. It's a little bit trickier to set up this time because there's a fairly small flat surface on the V which you need to clamp it to. So just be careful about how you clamp it so that it's stable and perfectly square. Not taking too much off at a time, just very small bites. Because of the angle you won't be able to get right into the bottom of the corner and get most of the material off. Get that waste away. I'm going to move the block round and do the same on the other side. So just working on the other side now. So we've now got the sides of the V fairly good, and we need to work on these corners to get rid of the waste material here that we haven't removed yet. So now working across the grain with a chisel. Oops. Trying to cut just far enough to remove that waste, but being careful not to go any deeper so we don't cut into the V. All the time using the flat surface of the shoulder of the V as a guide for the chisel. Chisel needs to be very sharp. At this stage I'm going to start checking the backlight again. So I'm positioning the angle poise lamp behind the V. Putting the head in position and looking at where the gaps are. At the moment there's gaps near the tip and at both the shoulders, and it's binding here, so I need to take a bit more material away from the base of the V here. Just change the camera position a bit so I can get at it more easily. So I'm actually going to cut across like this, again resting the chisel on the flat surface, but just angling it very slightly to take some material away from the base of the V. Check it again. And that's a lot better already. The shoulders are touching at the front, although there's a slight gap at the back here, so I need to change the angle a little bit. And there's a bit of a gap on one side of the V. So at this stage, it's just a question of taking off very small amounts of wood where it's touching and not taking any off where the gaps are, and just repeating that until there aren't any gaps anywhere. This is the longest part of the process, and if you're well practiced and lucky it might take you an hour. I think the first time I ever did this it took me a couple of days, so don't expect it to be quick. You just need to be patient, take it very slowly. Make sure you keep your chisel sharp. Careful not to break out as the chisel exits. At this point it doesn't matter too much because that material is going to be removed anyway. And check very frequently the fit. And as well as checking that there's no light coming through, you want to look at the angle, because it might be touching at the front here, which it is at the moment, which is stopping the light coming through, but there's a slight gap at the back. So I actually need to change the angle of this shoulder very slightly on both sides. I have to move the camera again now. Taking a little bit more off the front edge of his shoulder to change the angle. Improved the angle a bit, but it's got a little bit more to go. At this stage, the neck's quite a bit wider than the final neck dimension, so I'm actually trying to fit quite a lot more shoulder than I'm actually going to need. It's useful to keep this full width on the neck section to help keep the chisel flat, but on this section I don't really need to, because I've already made this perfectly flat, so I'm going to cut away the corners of this to be closer to the final dimensions of the neck. Just checking the fit again, and the angle of the shoulders is better. I've got a bit of a gap on this side and less of a gap on this side, and it's still touching along here, so I need to take a bit more off the V there. So I've spent about another half an hour working on the joint with the chisel, and it's getting pretty close now. It's actually at the point now where I can't see any light through any of the gaps, which means we're very close but not necessarily quite there. At this stage I'm going to test for gaps with a small piece of paper. So I know there are no gaps that go right through the joint, because I can't see any light through. But I think, looking at it, yes, I can actually fit a piece of paper into a gap at the back of the V. Just about on one of the shoulders as well. It's pretty good at the front. Can't get any paper in there, really. But because the back is the visible part of the joint on the finished guitar, you want to get that as good as possible. In terms of the joint strength, at this stage we've done enough really, it would be a perfectly good joint. But just to get it looking perfect at the back, I'm going to do a little bit more work on it. So because the gap's at the back of the V and it's slightly tight at the front, I'm actually going to switch now to using the sanding stick I used before. And just carefully take it a little bit away from the front of the V, blending it in to keep it flat, taking a bit more off the front and the back. So quite a small gap, so it shouldn't take very much. And I'll just do one side first, check it, and then if necessary work on the other side again. So I still can't see any light through. Just looking at it, it looks like the gap's reduced pretty well actually. I can just about get a corner of a piece of paper into the gap at the back there. So I'm going to do a tiny bit more this time on the other side. I'm just going to turn it round to make it easier to get to. So the gaps at the back, again I'm taking a little bit more off the front. And that's probably enough. Turn it round, have a look. Checking again, but I can't see any light through anywhere. Which I can't. And most of the gap's closed up at the back. It's just a very small gap at the back near the top of the V. And the gap is just here. So basically I want to take some wood away from everywhere except there. Making sure you get into that corner. It's very easy for sort of a lump to build up in the corner, which you can't get at with the sanding stick particularly. It's more chisel better really, so if you need to you can just run on, just take a tiny shaving off the corner with the chisel. Being very careful not to dig in. Check again. Again, no light visible through the joint still. And just about get the paper in a tiny little bit in that corner still, so I'll do a little bit more of it. Good. Can't get the paper in, but I can still see a tiny little gap there. And the other thing I'm looking for at this stage is for it to be tight on there, and it's usually I'll get to a point where it sticks on, it doesn't fall off, but I haven't got to that yet. And that suggests I need to take a bit more off the shoulders, because the shoulders are stopping it being tight on the V. Take a tiny bit off with a chisel. So I'm going to do a little bit more work with a sanding stick and chisel on the shoulders. So I spent another 5 or 10 minutes with a chisel and sanding stick on the shoulders, and now I'll push down on that. It just tightens up, so that's held in position now. Yeah, you can pull it off quite easily, but it just grips that bit. I still can't see any gaps anywhere. And I can't see any at the back. It won't fit the piece of paper in anywhere. So I think that's pretty well it. That looks pretty good everywhere. So I'm happy with that. and I'm going to set it up ready to glue up. So here we've got the clamp I'll be using to glue the V-joint up. A stretcher clamp. It's basically a couple of blocks of wood, some lengths of threaded rod and some wing nuts. I've placed a small piece of scrap wood on top of the neck here just to protect the wood against the threads from the bar digging in when you clamp it up. I haven't put any glue on yet, this is just a test fitting first. And at this stage you can clamp it up, not too much pressure, and just inspect all the way around the joint closely to make sure there are no gaps and everything's fitting perfectly. Once you're happy with that, take it apart again and get the glue on. So we're all ready to glue up. I'm going to be using Titebond for the join. You can use animal glue if you like. Titebond's absolutely fine. Spread it with a brush, make sure you get right into the corner. Fully coat all the surfaces and make sure you get plenty on the end grain part of the join. Generally with end grain it's advisable to size the wood first. But the problem with this joint is if you do that, things move a bit with the moisture and you lose your fit. And most of the strength of the joint is in the V part, so you don't really need to do it. If you were going to do it, you'd have to size it, then refit the main glue. So I've put plenty of glue on both surfaces. Because there's a fair bit of glue on there, it will want to slide around a bit when you clamp it up, so you just have to be aware of that. Push it back into place if it moves out of alignment. Making sure I've got the top to the top. Just going to give it a little bit of a slide back and forth until it starts to grip a little bit. Start to do up the wing nuts. Keep checking the alignment, move it if you need to. And make sure you do the wing nuts up evenly. Just pushing that very slightly down so that it's perfectly flush. If it's not absolutely perfectly flush, it's not the end of the world. You can skim a tiny bit off the plane after it's all glued up and dried. Should see the glue squeeze out of the joint as you tighten the clamps up. And at this stage, let's take a wet brush and clean off the excess glue, just to make absolutely sure there's no gaps anywhere. The most critical at the back is the visible part of the joint. That all looks good. So just final tighten now, again making sure you do two sides evenly. Basically if you do this as tight as you can with your fingers, that's pretty good. You don't need any more pressure than that. Might see a tiny bit more glue squeeze out, not much really. That's it done. Leave it overnight and clean it up. And and then hopefully you'll see a perfect join. So I've removed the clamps and just lightly planed the top surface of the head, and hopefully you can see I've got a nice clean V-joint there. On the back, this part won't be removed until a little bit later in the making process, so you won't really see exactly how good that joint is until the rest of the neck's carved.